Ronald D. Moore just did an interview on Katee Sackhoff's podcast. He talks about a lot of things. It's like an hour and a half. Definitely recommend checking it out. Some really cool tidbits in there. Sackhoff brings up this topic that is such an enduring point of discussion for the Battlestar Galactica fandom, which is about, of course, who is Starbuck? What is she, especially after her death and resurrection and disappearance in the finale? This is something that has continued to, I don't know if I would use the word plague the fandom, but definitely has endured in the minds and hearts of fans since the finale aired. And was it 16 years ago? Oh my goodness. So this is an article from Inverse covering that specific section of their interview. Battlestar showrunner finally addresses the show's biggest question. When the beloved sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica aired its 3-part finale 16 years ago in March of 2009, the series left fans arguably with more questions than answers. To this day, BSG remains one of the greatest sci-fi shows of all time, so much so that many fans hardly even remember it was technically a reboot of a 1978 series of the same name. But no matter how great BSG was, and no matter how well it holds up, one question plagues the fans, and also apparently plagues Starbuck actress Katee Sackhoff. On her podcast, The Sackhoff Show, the actress recently decided to get to the bottom of one of the biggest mysteries in all of Battlestar fandom. What is Starbuck? And the person she asked was the man who created the reboot, BSG, in the first place, writer Ronald D. Moore. I've heard this before. I've actually heard Katee Sackhoff address this numerous times. We'll go ahead and see her comments here first, though. She says, I get asked one question over and over and over again, speaking to Moore, and I don't have an answer for people. And they say, why do you not know? And I say, because I never asked, what is Starbuck? Sackhoff is referring to the moment in Daybreak Part 3 in which Kara, Starbuck Thrace, is talking to Lee Adama on the surface of the real planet Earth in the distant past, then vanishes. Previously, she has seemingly perished in the episode Maelstrom before coming back to life inexplicably in the Season 3 finale Crossroads Part 2. While there were spiritual hints at Starbuck's role after she returned, there was never a clear answer on the show as to how and why. I've covered this before. I've covered Kara Thrace, Starbuck, in several videos, and she's just one of the most fascinating characters, and definitely one of the most debated topics of the series is, what is Starbuck? What is her nature, especially after her death and resurrection? And the fact that the story continued so heavily centered around the mystery of Starbuck and what her mission was, it was definitely a huge part of the series that they focused on and kind of left hanging at the very end. But she gets this question all the time, so she addressed this on social media not that long ago. I remember her responding to a fan question, and she said, this was her answer at the time, that Starbuck was a spirit brought to guide humanity to Earth and salvation. And honestly, I think that's a great explanation. I think that's very insightful, and it fits well with the narrative and its spiritual foundations. And that is what she did. She was brought back. The whole reason it seemed for her to be brought back was that she could lead humanity to the ultimate goal, to Earth, for their salvation. It was her that pressed the button that took that giant leap and brought them all to Earth, their new home. So that more speaks to the purpose of her character rather than her nature, what she actually is. I'd say that's a decent answer that she shared before. But what does the showrunner say now, addressing this 16 years later? And Ronald D. Moore is quoted saying, it was a process of trying to figure that out. I think in the end, I opted to not decide. Every answer we came up with was unsatisfying to what I thought she was. And what I thought she was something kind of indefinable. I didn't want her to be an angel. I didn't want her to be a Jesus figure that had died and been resurrected, but was the part of the unknowable that had come to us. I've heard him say this before, so he's basically just reiterating what he's already kind of addressed. And he said that he just preferred it to be ambiguous or open to interpretation. And in a sense, I understand where he's coming from, that they floated around several ideas, several answers, but that none of those really felt right to put a name or to put a label on it and define it. So certainly I understand that to a point of the fascination and imagination that can be sparked by leaving it up to interpretation and having that in the air for fans to chew on and think about, and that different people can see it different ways. It is, though, unsatisfying for so many, as he said. Well, it's funny because he views it as unsatisfying to put an answer on it. Meanwhile, from a fan's perspective, it's unsatisfying to not know after you've spent so much time on the mystery of Starbuck in those later seasons. Such a huge part of that show at the time was, who is Starbuck? What is going on with this character? It's interesting what he says later, though, and what I found most interesting, too, of this topic of conversation, because he repeats what he said before, but he also admits that this still haunts him, that this decision that he made haunts him as much as it does Katee Sackhoff. So he continues saying, I think for some people it is very unsatisfying, talking to Sackhoff about the ambiguity of Starbuck's return and her ghostly disappearance. Looking back on it, I'm not entirely sure that was the right choice. Maybe I should have given an answer, because it is this weird hanging thing from the show that does come up a lot. Ultimately, like the ending of BSG itself, Moore still feels torn over the decision, but leans toward defending the ambiguity. In fact, as he and Sackhoff point out, there's a lot in the BSG mythos that doesn't exactly make logical sense, and that the viewer has to ascribe some kind of supernatural or spiritual presence. And like it or hate it, that blend of religious and science fiction themes is part of what made Battlestar Galactica what it was. Even if it didn't answer all of these questions, the show remained to the very end very much itself. I'm sorry, that's just a funny way to end that article. The Family Guy clip came up in my head.
I did not care for The Godfather.
What didn't you like about it?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
As we can take from this, that the ending insists upon itself. I think it's interesting, though, now that Ronald Moore is admitting or questioning whether it was the right decision. And I think that's good, that he's at least admitting that this has been very contentious for people and kind of a bitter point for fans to have such ambiguity. I would say I did struggle at first with that ending. I like the finale, actually, for the most part. It's only that one segment, that one part of Starbuck's end to her journey that just feels very frustrating, that after all that, we don't have a clear answer as to what happened, who was behind her resurrection, and what her nature was. All of that. Because there definitely seems to be those two camps that are okay with it and can understand to a degree of not wanting to put a definitive answer on it. Because even if you did put an answer to it, would it still be satisfying in the way that fans would have hoped? That's hard to even say. But for the most part, I did like the finale, actually. Maybe it's just kind of weird, the method of how they left it, of her just suddenly disappearing. Maybe there just would have been a better way to disappear. Just seemed very, in that sense, underwhelming. That's something that I appreciate from Frank Herbert's Dune series, is that not everything needs to be answered, but that it's good to pose questions to the reader. That's what's most fascinating, that your imagination is sparked and you can theorize on so many things. And so I totally agree with that to a point, but at the time, I did struggle with that. I think I softened on it a bit later. And then there's the other side that feels that maybe it was just a cop-out, that they just couldn't decide, so they just left it alone. And there's definitely some strong opinions on it. Ultimately, it's a great show. We don't have shows like this anymore, I feel like. This was so special. And it's interesting because this particular show changed the landscape of science fiction television to such a degree that everyone tried to be the next Battlestar Galactica, that they wanted to have that same kind of grit, that same tone and aesthetic. There was like a lot of copycats, I would say, that were coming out, and that just never really could live up to the same spirit of it, of what made it so special. And I think that's because they weren't trying to copy, even if it was a remake. They are actually trying to still obviously uphold the spirit of what the original was, but do something different with it that still was satisfying to watch and be engrossed in. So this is a prime example of how people should approach reboots, I think, to adhere to the core traits and spirit and core themes and story beats, but in doing something unique that's still very well written and well thought out and crafted, that it becomes its own thing. It's special in its own right. And I think they did that well. And even back then, when they did like sex swapping the characters of Starbuck and Boomer, like no one can do that now because they're not doing it for the right reasons. For Ronald Moore, which is actually a subject they covered in the podcast, was why they decided to make Starbuck and Boomer women. So I recommend checking that out. But you can tell that it wasn't to check a box, that it was something that really really sparked his imagination. And you still have the core traits of the original Starbuck, this devil-may-care star pilot, cigar smoking character. But to have a woman in that role, like, it just sent his imagination wild of like, what could be behind such a character? What's her motivations? What's her background? What's her damage? I think that's the key. At the end of the day, it has to be in service of a well-written character. And that's why it worked so well. But I'd love to hear your take on Starbuck's arc through the last 2 seasons of Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica. Do you appreciate the ambiguity of the ending, or would you have preferred a more definitive answer? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe for more BSG and other sci-fi and fantasy news, theories, and lore. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, you can leave a super thanks or join as a YouTube member for early access to new videos and other perks. You can also check out my Patreon page for exclusive content. Thank you all so much for your support, and as always, have a very nerdy day.